Good morning. So we get a fun one here today. As mentioned, we have Jeff and Katie here who represent not only the jurisdiction that won the bid, but actually 2 out of the 3 jurisdictions technically that were in the running for Amazon headquarters. So as you may know, Northern Virginia was one of 2 jurisdictions that was the lucky winner of the second Amazon headquarters that we'll be talking about today. They won half of the 50,000 jobs that were initially going to go to just one lucky city, the other half going to Long Island City. But of course, in the 20 finalists that were very publicly and sometimes vehemently advocating for their own jurisdictions, there were 3 particular parts of DC that were represented, and that was the DC metro area, that was DC, Virginia, and Montgomery County. So I want to start out by asking you, and I'll start with you, Jeff, how you think about the virtues and limitations of Amazon having picked the kind of Crystal City region in particular, and how that would have compared in terms of infrastructure preparedness, et cetera, to, for example, having picked the district or another part.
Sure. Well, first let me say it's really great to be here to talk about this. We are very excited, thrilled for our neighbors in Virginia. We think this is really a win for the region. And it highlights the importance of the work that under the leadership of our Mayor, Muriel Bowser, we've been committed to doing already in the district. And I think what we did last year in preparation as a region was really put our heads together with Maryland and Virginia and talk about the kinds of projects that we knew we needed to collectively work together on delivering to make the region more attractive. And I think what we've seen so far in the past year is a real delivery on some of those commitments. We put our heads together as a region to raise the capital for the improvements to our metro system, which we know are critical. A lot of that work was really catalyzed by the conversation of having Amazon coming to the region. And so we've got several other big infrastructure projects, both here in the district and with our regional neighbors that have been really critical as a part of that conversation, and it really highlights some of our achievements in that area.
Katie, what about for you? Are you surprised that you landed Amazon, and what about the particular region in which it's located around Crystal?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about this. As I was mentioning to Nicole, infrastructure is really the name of the game when we think about Amazon and our potential in Arlington County, but also the region to absorb these 25,000 jobs over 10 or 15 years while mitigating the impacts to quality of life, and that is often the issue of congestion around transportation. One of the reasons we believe that Crystal City was always such a strong contender and such a good place to be able to absorb these employees is that we actually have the infrastructure existing. The transportation is an incredibly important piece. Crystal City is one of the most transit-oriented places, we'd argue, on the entire eastern seaboard, of course with a metro station there, also a bus rapid transit system that connects us to our neighbors in Alexandria, a rich bus system of our own as well as WMATA's, connection to commuter rail, Virginia Railway Express, which brings employees in from as far south as Fredericksburg, and increasingly, we hope, better connectivity to the air resource of National Airport. So the transportation infrastructure was there, and the private infrastructure was there. It's not something we've boasted about in Arlington, but we've seen a vacancy rate as high as 20% in Crystal City, largely as a result of base realignment and closure about a decade ago. So we absolutely had the private office building, the private infrastructure, to either absorb some of these employees in the first couple waves in existing buildings, or to provide those redevelopment potential opportunities to create those new buildings around the headquarters over the next decade.
So, Jeff, you started to allude a bit to the planning that was done before the winner had even been announced, which of course was common amongst many jurisdictions who were anticipating potentially getting Amazon. Can you tell me the extent to which both of you were involved in the respective bids, either for your own jurisdictions or in your case maybe for multiples, and to what extent you were able to articulate the interests of your own jurisdictions at the outset versus playing catch up at this point as to maybe what you were committed to and what you'll be getting in return?
Sure. Well, I can say that from a transportation perspective, we certainly spent a lot of time really highlighting some of the projects that we had that were either in the pipeline or currently in development that we thought would be critical to attracting a company like Amazon. So we currently have several big bridge renovation projects. We've been successful in the district in reducing the number of structurally deficient bridges we have. Currently, our largest one is the Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge, which is a $500 million project, which has a direct connection for the city with our neighboring jurisdictions. And so those kinds of projects were an opportunity for us to showcase the work that we're doing and also talk about the connectivity that we are bringing to the region over the upcoming years.
Yeah, and I think embedded in your question, Nicole, is a really good sentiment that my colleagues and I, as the elected officials in Arlington County, sought to establish as a guiding principle, which is the investments we would make sort of, quote, for Amazon, and then the investments that we'd be making in what we knew were critical to create a thriving neighborhood and sense of community around Crystal City, as well as connectivity to the region. So the credit for the day-to-day negotiations and the Herculean task of preparing a response to that request for proposals really goes to our economic development team, led by Victor Hoskins and Christina Wynn in Arlington County. But my colleagues and I had the involvement along the way of being very clear, particularly as we saw some pretty wild headlines about tax breaks and incentives, being very clear that we were interested in only very minimal grants, et cetera, directly to Amazon or tax breaks, and instead putting together an incentive package that would focus in that reinvestment in Crystal City and in Arlington County. And I think that's what you see in our package. It is the opportunity, about $360 million of investments in transportation in Arlington County, a second station entrance for Crystal City, which is going to be critical, those transitway pieces and others. So I'd say that was really the nature of our involvement, was setting that priority that we sought to invest back in ourselves and a strong community that would also benefit Amazon.
Yeah, great. Katie, just turning to you again, what about some of the greatest challenges that you anticipate and things that perhaps you're at the county level you don't have a direct effect on and or voice in?
Absolutely.
You're anticipating having to absorb?
So I think, as Jeff was mentioning, we achieved an astonishing accomplishment this year across all 3 metro jurisdictions with dedicated funding for the first time in the system's history. To say just a word about it without getting too into the weeds, the Virginia solution came at a really heavy cost to local jurisdictions. Essentially, it redirected and gutted the funding that we use in Arlington and Alexandria to do things like improve pedestrian access, bikes, et cetera, the things that provide that kind of last mile connectivity. We're facing a really significant funding challenge. We also saw significant road funding stripped, which is really critical to the outer jurisdictions and being able to provide part of that infrastructure. So I worry greatly about the future of transit funding. We, not for nothing, have a looming transit capital fiscal cliff in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which could affect our commuter rail system and local buses as well. So we are not even a little bit out of the woods when it comes to those investments in transportation. And then the thing that I think we continue to think about as a region, of course, is housing, which is a maybe less often talked about part of infrastructure. But this region has not kept up with the demands of our growing workforce for housing. I've been saying Amazon will likely not cause a housing affordability crisis because we already have one in this region, and making sure that we have the policy tools and, frankly, the capital to create not only the committed affordable housing that will be so critical to keeping our low-income and working-class neighbors in the community, but frankly, just adding enough housing, period, to make sure that we can keep up the demands of our workforce, of our aging senior population, and others who are seeking to stay in this region and make it home.
Yeah, let's stay on housing just for one moment. Thank you for quoting yourself. I was going to cite that same quote myself, actually. So I saw a projection just this week. I think there have been a number of them that Arlington alone will need 8,000 to 9,000 new units. Projections vary. In any event, it will be significant, the extent of housing that will be needed both in Arlington and in the region. I understand you have some new housing funding coming your way, particularly at the state level. How do you anticipate being able to execute on actually getting the housing built in the time crunch that you have?
Absolutely. Well, so first, for the purposes of framing, what I'd note is when you look at the region and what we've seen in terms of job growth, the region has been adding about 45,000 jobs a year for the past decade or so. So when you look at 25,000 jobs over 10 or 15 years, we're talking in the realm of maybe a 5% bump or boost. So I don't believe that this location alone is going to drive or should drive our housing decisions, but I do think it presents a laser focus and indeed a spotlight on what the imperative has been or needs to be for this region to add housing units, and that's especially true for Arlington County. So to summarize, we'll have a two-pronged approach consistent with our adopted public policies. We have a plan to add thousands of housing units in Crystal City, consistent with a sector plan that was adopted in that community back in 2008. And then we have really aggressive plans and existing policies, our Affordable Housing Ordinance and an Affordable Housing Investment Fund that we have used to create committed affordable units, which is to say those units that accept public financing to be created in exchange for staying committed at rents that are affordable to our neighbors, making usually 60% of the area median income or below, paired with our housing grants. So the challenge with the development of those committed affordable units with the very high cost of land in Arlington County and the region has always been capital. And so in that regard, we are really excited about this new capital investment from the state. We hope that some of our private sector partners, Amazon will now be one, will join us in meeting that capital challenge so that we can create those, at the end of the day, what are stable homes for our neighbors who are helping support the local economy.
And if I could just add, this workforce and affordable housing has been a huge priority for our mayor. And we've spent over the past 4 years upwards of $500 million through our Housing Production Trust Fund on bringing that opportunity. And that's something that through our programs we will continue to do going forward.
Yeah, and Katie, likewise, how are you building affordable housing into that overall infrastructure that you just articulated?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the notion of committed affordable units being close to transit has always been a key priority. I can't take credit for it. My colleagues, my predecessors on the Arlington County Board have been advancing that idea for a long time. So integrating housing planning around transportation planning generally, and then with a specific lens to committed affordable projects has been really core. You see that in the Crystal City sector plan that we have. You see it in our adopted affordable housing master plan. And there are ways in which these things are complementary, right? We know that building committed affordable units close to transit dramatically lowers the need for parking in those buildings. In turn, that allows more of those units to be built more cost effectively because if there's anybody here in the development business, you know that paying for parking is one of the most expensive parts of developing housing. So you see that in sort of policy examples, large and small, the way that those goals of transit-oriented development and affordable housing are truly knitted together.
Yeah, Jeff, speaking of parking, so Amazon themselves have stated, I believe, that they are not intending for their workers to drive to the new headquarters, or at least they plan to discourage it in part by limiting the amount of parking that they're building into their headquarters, similar to what you're articulating for the housing. So that's put some additional pressure on the public transit system. WMATA in particular has gone through some troubles, including lower ridership, even as the population of DC in particular has increased. So it's probably not a given that another increase in population necessarily solves those problems. Arguably, of course, it could make them work. How are we going to, what do you have planned to make some faster needed improvements to the metro system?
Sure. Well, and I should take a step back and say, as was reflected on previous panels, in the city and really across the region, we've embraced a number of new mobility options to complement our overall transit system, as we heard about on the earlier panels as it relates to scooters and e-bikes. And so we look at all of those things really as a system for which people can get to and from work, from home, and from other services as well. We have, as has been said, we've spent significant time thinking about the capital program at WMATA and how to make the rail system itself better. The general manager has recently proposed some operational changes that we are supportive of as a way to increase reliability and to bring that service to a place where people feel a sense of confidence that they can get to and from where they need to be. We're also thinking about an important component of the WMATA system, which is bus service. And so in the city, we're currently developing bus-only lanes, priority bus lanes for our city to allow for WMATA services to move quicker. And we're working with WMATA to ensure that they're exploring technology that makes the user experience more simplified. And so all of those things combined are a part of of our strategy. It works well with what we're doing to support the Amazon effort, but truthfully, these are also things that we've been very focused on as a priority for our city.
And one nuance, if you wouldn't mind my jumping in, is ridership and the declines in ridership have been uneven across the metro line. So we do have some areas, and I'm sure the district has its own pain points, where there's crowding on the metro, right? There's a lack of capacity. Crystal City, Pentagon City, not one of those areas. In fact, when you measure the entrances and exits to and from those two stations, Crystal City and Pentagon City, it's down by about a third since its peak in 2009. We estimate between Metro Rail, Metro Bus, and our own local ART system, we have the capacity to bring on about 50 to 70,000 more daily trips. And so actually adding more riders to the system in this part of the system could help WMATA. We know that one of the reasons the public subsidies have become so burdensome on us as the localities is that ridership has declined. And so the idea of returning those riders to the areas where we've seen big drop-offs, where we do have capacity, could help stabilize the operational funding of the system.
Yeah, and this may be my last question, but I want to ask you more specifically also about some of the more localized transportation questions, even getting down to things like how are there plans to make Crystal City and the surrounding region more walkable? I know one plan that was discussed is creating a bridge between the airport, Reagan National Airport, and Crystal City. What other types of things can and is the region planning to do to make the area more amenable to other forms of transportation besides driving? And to what extent do both of you get to weigh in on that decision too?
Sure. Well, I'll just say briefly, we announced earlier this week a project that we are working on with our colleagues in Virginia and with the Federal Rail Administration. That would be a bridge connectivity for bikes and pedestrians, in addition to opening up the prospect of commuter rail, which is something that we think is critical to our region. And so this for us is just another opportunity to collaborate on those things. And I know we're having discussions about other types of interjurisdictional projects, both with Virginia and with Maryland, as we see this as an opportunity to connect in as many forms, as many modes of transportation as possible.
We are thrilled about that Long Bridge bike and ped opportunity as well in specific. And I would say what's exciting about this Amazon opportunity and working with our state partners is that it has created a real chance to realize some projects that might have been more aspirational, shall we say, before. The bridge, the pedestrian bridge connecting DCA to the heart of Crystal City is absolutely one of them. It's an extraordinary idea when you think about its potential not only for business but for residents of that area to be able to walk directly to the airport rather than to have to take their TNC or other vehicle around to navigate that way. But another similar visionary project is bringing Route 1 to grade. As a former resident of Crystal City, and as anyone who's ever spent time there knows, it can feel like crossing the Rubicon to get from one side of Crystal City to the other because of that very kind of mid-century idea of the elevated highway bisecting the community. So the chance to bring that to grade, which our state partners have committed to working with us to do, will be extraordinary in really creating a sense of one Crystal City, one Pentagon City. Our business improvement district in that area points out we are Virginia's largest walkable downtown. And so making it feel more walkable through the leveling of those elevated highways, through the connectivity to the airport, and frankly through that nuts and bolts stuff that Arlington has been committed to for decades now, which is improving streetscapes, curbs, street trees, retail that provides visual interest. Those commitments will all join with the bigger infrastructure projects to create a real sense of a walkable neighborhood for both business tenants as well as residents and neighbors.
Well, thank you. There's a lot more that could be the basis for some audience questions, so I'm now going to see if anyone has any. Yes, gentleman over here.
Hi, Chris Teal. Was interested to hear about Amazon discouraging people from driving. People are still going to drive. Does the government have any carrots and sticks to, stop that? Because, people are still going to drive, aren't they? And the roads are tight.
That's a great question. I'd be happy to take a first stab. Chris, first of all, great to see you. So the stick, honestly, the government doesn't need to provide it. It's congestion. We know that Northern Virginia has some of the worst in the nation, and that's probably true for the region as well. And so it does become about carrots. How do you make transit more attractive as an alternative, making it more reliable, right, as you were mentioning, safe, on time, and one-seat rides, right, are so often the answer. We have a lot of experience in Arlington County working with developers and with office tenants to think about what we call transportation demand management. So parking minimums are a big piece of it, but it's also things, for example, like what will the building owner or the tenant offer their employees in terms of transit benefits? What is the package that looks like? How do you build in, for example, when you're building a new building, the amenities like a shower, the bike racks that might enable somebody who lives a little bit closer to opt for biking. And then, of course, it is the biggest issue of all is locating your office buildings close to transit. Because, no matter how well-intentioned somebody might be to bike or ride public transit or mass transit to work, if it's going to require them to walk 1.5 miles in DC humidity or cold to do it, that's unlikely. So talking about the location of this headquarters is frankly being nearly on top of a metro station, nearly on top of the busiest Virginia station in the Virginia Railway Express system, as well as those buses and metro lines, will give folks those opportunities. And then again, through the site planning process, we have a chance to get even more granular, the physical amenities, the benefits that will be offered to employees to help them take advantage of those carrots so that they don't have to spend the time in the stick of our congestion.
Yeah, I would echo exactly that. That it's our job. We want to provide as many accessible, affordable options for people. We know that people have the choice, and we want to make sure that we are creating as much of that opportunity as possible and letting folks know what that choice is.
I think we can take one more quick question. Yeah, the mic is heading this way. Okay.
Yes, thank you. I'm Miriam Gusevich. I'm an urban designer. My question is about what are your plans with regards to the realignment of the freight train from CSX? We have been talking about this forever, and it seems like with Amazon moving in that this is a great opportunity to actually do that and actually use it for other modes of transportation. Thank you.
Do you want to start?
Sure. Well, the Long Bridge project that we were just talking about is in part a freight project, and so as was talked about on earlier panels, the movement of freight and goods is something that continues to be critical for us as a region, and I think having Amazon here gives us the opportunity to continue that conversation, both from a rail perspective, but also from a commercial delivery perspective, which is vitally important to us as a city.
And I do think that Amazon will provide, exactly as you're asking or indicating, a renewed focus on that Long Bridge track expansion opportunity, which is critical for the movement of freight, is also critical for the movement of people, right? We know that Amtrak avails itself of that bridge as well. The Virginia Railway Express, which I keep mentioning, is a commuter rail that runs on the freight lines. So with our Fredericksburg line, it is on the CSX track. And so creating that expansion creates more capacity for all of those systems, and eventually realizing our aspirations of having a commuter rail that goes across jurisdiction, Mark to Virginia, VRE to Maryland and the district. But it is a project that is massive. It is interjurisdictional. It is public-private. It is very expensive. So I know that Amazon's decision is helping us all focus. As Jeff was mentioning, we've seen some movement on it even in the last few weeks. And it's very much a priority, I know, of our governor in Virginia and the director of the Department of Rail and Public Transportation for the Commonwealth, and I'm sure it is as well for our DC partners.
Well, thank you. I know I'm looking forward to seeing how this pans out. Good luck to you both.
Thank you.